Hello. Can you get going in a second? I just have to turn on a few things. Hello, Barb.
Hello. It's cold out there.
Feels good.
What the heck?
I thought it was super hot up here today. I'm just turning on the stuff. Oh, hello. Torches, etc. So, yes. The oxygen, a very high pressure tank, 2500 psi. On the high side valve first. You don't get to do this. Only I get to do this. Then, once the high side's on, and hopefully you've remembered to turn the low pressure side of the gauge off, so that it doesn't, the high pressure doesn't blow the low pressure gauge to kingdom come. Then you can gradually turn up the low side of the oxygen pressure gauge. And I operate this torch, medium-sized torch, at about 8 psi for oxygen and about 2 psi for propane. I also have a propane tank that's got a high and a low side. No, just a standard 1 gauge regulator. So you turn on the tank and then you turn up the regulator to get to the pressure that you want. If you have too high of oxygen, it'll blow your propane flame out, high pressure, or high volume. And if your propane pressure is too high, that extra propane make your flame dirty and ruin all of your glass. So, first thing we'll do is turn on the propane and then turn on the oxygen gradually. I'm going to adjust my camera in a minute so you can see this better. And let's get things situated a bit better. Whoa. Oh, that's pretty good. Alright, so you can see the flame. And you'll be able to see what I mean. Alright, so usually before I begin, I clean the torch a little bit. Mainly it's going to be a loose carbon that's in all of those little tiny holes where the gas, propane, is mixing with the oxygen. And carbon builds up. So tapping it gets it off, because when I pick it up to polish the marble at the end, anything that's loose in those jets is going to come off and deposit on the marble and make us very sad. So what we're going to do first is check our materials. Today I'm going to be making a flower marble. The bulk of the marble is clear, so I'm starting with a large diameter clear rod. I'm going to have petals of certain colors, and I'm going to have stamen of certain colors. I'm going to have petioles, which are green, the little tiny leaves around the petals. And then if I have time, I'm going to do a different petal technique surrounding the whole flower. So the flower itself will be what's called an inside-out technique, where I draw the flower two-dimensionally on a disc. Then I'm going to take that disc that I have, pretend my hand is a disc, I'm going to take the disc and slump it into a cup and then flatten it. Each time I slump it and flatten it, that glass from the outside of the disc is pushing up on my design on this side of the disc and causing the flower to bloom out. When the flower is done blooming, in this case, if I have time left in the hour, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add petals around the bottom side under where the flower has bloomed and then press those in. It'll make the whole flower appear taller and give it a little more three-dimensionality. So what I need to do is think briefly about what color petals I want. And in this case I want a pink petal, and so I pulled a little thread. But that is boring. You want to see me pull a thread because that's cool, so that's what I'm going to do. Anyway, I'll use pink for the petals. I'm going to use yellow for the stamen, and to give the stamen a little extra dimension, I'm going to melt the tip of this little thread that I pulled, and then I have some enamel powder here, which is red. Let's see if you can see it. It's like dust from the moon, only it's glass, and enamel powder is very highly pigmented. So I'm going to take the thread, melt the end, and stick it into the enamel powder. And when this cools, you'll see it's actually going to be difficult to see on the yellow and the red because they tend to stay black when they're heated. But you'll see the color starting to resolve now. The yellow has returned to yellow, and that black on the end is actually a red enamel powder. And when that gets put on the clear glass, it spreads out a little bit, and it gives it a very natural, alive look. So no sharp lines, all fuzzy and fluffy and flower looking. So this one is going to be too cold now to use, so I'm going to melt the end and tweeze it off and clean it up for later. So the petioles, the green tiny leaves surrounding the petals, I'm going to use a green thread, which I've already pulled. And then on the petals on the outside will be a series of dots. It'll be the inside color of the dot, so light green. Then I'll put a dark green, bigger dot over top of that, and then a smaller light green dot on the outside. So that will look, once I take a pick and melt those together and drag through it, it will shape it into a leaf and it will look like a vein. And hopefully we'll get to see that. But for now, let's pull a pink thread. Pink is a difficult color. Pink uses an oxide of gold or silver, and it's very sensitive to color unless it's mixed with certain opaquing agents. So what I'm going to do is take this sort of coral pink color, which I hate, and mix it with white, and it's going to make it a more stable color and hopefully not quite as orange. So what I'm going to do is heat both of these rod ends, and what I'm doing right now is called flashing. I need to make sure that I don't heat these rods too rapidly. I'm heating them slowly up to their strain point, which is 500 degrees. And once I'm beyond 500 degrees, I should be able to settle down and just heat those up and start melting them together and pushing them together. If I don't flash it and I just stick the rod in there, it's going to crack. Oh, that one was hard. White is a very forgiving color because it's already a very stable one. Pink tends to be shockier, often because the opaquing and coloring agents aren't completely mixed in with the glass because they're sensitive and the manufacturer doesn't want to burn out that color. So the nice thing about white glass and colored glass is very often you can use a lot of white glass as a base and some of your colored glass to make quite an array of colors where you're using just like a 1:6 ratio or a 1:7 ratio, and you can get very different colors because of the chemistry of the glass. Right now I'm not going to be too exact. If I was going to be exact, I would cut these rod segments and weigh the glass out and then mix it pretty vigorously using, instead of the rods themselves to mix it, to throw off my ratios, I would take the glass that I had weighed out and attach them to steel punties and then use those to melt and twist the glass. That's pretty technical and boring as crap to watch. So we're just going to mix this pink and white together, and we've got a slug of glass, which is about that big. I'm going to say that's the perfect size. So now I'm going to get it hot so it forms into a nice ball that really wants to start letting gravity take hold of it and stretch it downwards. And I'll show you that. It's starting to fall. So when it's ready to do that, you let it toughen up a little bit, just harden, and then you can start to pull it. And I'm always spinning things because I don't want them to fall. I'm going to go out of frame a little bit because I want this to be about 2 millimeters. And once the narrowest portion has solidified, then you can start pulling a little harder and a little quicker to get the ends, which are usually cooler, to continue to pull to the same diameter of the thread. And now you can see at about where my tweezers are, it starts to get bigger. It's difficult to see on this little camera, but you can see from here at the end, it's about that diameter, and then on this end, it's quite a bit wider, which is okay. That could be useful for a different technique. For right now, I'm just melting those into manageable segments. This is a little bit too long. So I melted it in half and set those aside to make our flour. And now this white and this pink rod I'm not going to use anymore, so I'm going to set those aside. And let's start making our clear gather for the marble. I'm going to melt it. It's going to form into a ball on the end. I'm going to squish it down with gravity and some force, and then I'm going to take a graphite paddle, and as this starts to squish out the side, I'm going to come in along top of it and squish it down and make an even thinner disc. So like if you were making Spritz cookies and your dough was pretty soft, then you'd shoot it out onto the tray, and it would come out flatter than a normal piece of like bread dough or something else. So like squishing your Play-Doh flat, or like a, what else?
Very cold Spritz cookie.
I was thinking like a pancake. You know, you pour the batter and it starts out big and then it goes out to the side, getting thinner, and then as it starts to cook it. But that's a terrible metaphor. Forget I started that one.
Yeah, it's true.
Anyway, let's, for now, go ahead and work on this gather. You can see I flashed it a little bit, and now it's hot enough, it's starting to melt. And I'm angling this back a little bit, so as it melts, it's falling down along the axis of the glass rod. So I'm using gravity to have it fall back against itself. And as I turn it and it's melting and falling back on itself, it's going to become a bigger and bigger ball on the end.
We need more discussion of Spritz cookies.
Oh, man, I used to make so many of those. I haven't in recent years. I got like 4 different recipes. They're marked like with my mom's favorite, my favorite, Barbie's favorite, Nico's favorite.
Can eat those things like jelly beans.
I had one of those old-timey electric mixers where you could just like put the ingredients in and let it go for like 10 minutes and it would beat it into the perfect consistency. So you just have to like handle it for a few minutes to get the butter mushy, and then you'd stick it into your squirty thingy, and then we'd make millions of them and box them up and give them out as Christmas presents. Can't do that now because of germs. Anyway, so this gather is getting bigger. I'm going to let it get a little bit bigger. Let's look at it under the magnifying glass. Oh my god, it looks cool. And you can see I'm turning it, but it's still falling downwards even as I'm turning it. So it's very liquidy.
$1 million to the first person who comes up with a Corona-shaped cookie cutter.
It could just be round, and then you put like red sprinkles on it.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, too soon? That's in poor taste. Ba-doom boom. Alright, my gather is getting good enough to squish now. So, next week hopefully we'll have a few camera angles. My son Nico has hunted down a mini tower, and he got it going. We're waiting on a faster hard drive and a few more of the cameras that are a little higher resolution webcams. And then, because it would be nice to have something where you can see me talking, something where you can see the torch, something where you can see something up close, and then maybe an angle over where you can see me polishing the marble and putting it in the annealing oven. So we'll play with that next week. this format's nice. I mean, I just did it initially accidentally, and I think it came out pretty cool. So. All right, so that one is ready to squish. I'm going to put it down on a graphite marvering plate that's right next to me. I do a lot of work on this little graphite plate. And so I've pushed it down, and then I've squished it as I've pushed down and worked my way around. And it's made kind of a nice, large, flat disc. Bigger and flatter than it would have if I just pressed down on that. And I like to have the extra disc surface area to draw my flower, and it gives it a little quicker inside out action. I'm having some problems keeping my torch balanced here. I have to check my pressures here. That's pretty good. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is put in the stamen. I'm going to draw the flower on here as like a two-dimensional cross section of the flower it is to be. I'll start on the inside, the center portion, and work my way out. And so the center portion of the flower is going to be the stamen. So I'm using the little yellow thread. I'm going to melt the end, pick up a tiny dab of red enamel powder, and then put that dot. I'm going to do that 6 times. I'll do it twice, and then I'll show you guys. So there is 2 of the dots for the stamen that I put on there. So yellow thread, red enamel powder onto the disc. Now I think I'm only going to do 4 because these are kind of big. So let's see what that looks like. Could be cool. Let's try it. Alright, so I'm trying a new petal two-dimensional cross-section that I've done a few of them, but I had a friend ask me about doing a certain kind of flower, and so I've had that in the back of my mind, and so I wanted to keep trying some different ways of seeing if I can get that to look a little more like the flower that they requested. And I'm not going to tell you what it is, because it's not, if it doesn't come out the right way, then I want to be able to say, oh yeah, that came out exactly the way I wanted it to. Okay, I've heated those in a little bit, and I think I actually want to melt the surface in and give them a little bit of a poke right in the center of each dot to make sure that they have a pointy edge coming through that enamel powder. So it'll look like that yellow is bursting out through a slightly dense field of red pollen. And you might say, pollen isn't red.
That's what I was thinking.
To which I would answer, I know that. But wouldn't it look cool if it was? And so many of the flowers that I make are like, they're fantasy blooms. It's not a real flower. It suggests a flower, and so I can go outside of the bounds of yellow pollen and flower shape. Alright, so what I'm going to draw is, instead of concentric circles of dashes or dots, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start towards the center and work my way out and make sort of a woven pattern for the petals. And I'm interested in seeing how this turns out in like 3 or 4 different sizes, and with the possibility of having this pattern repeat in the center and then farther out to get the kind of flower shape that I would like to experiment with. So I am going to have to check my oxygen here in a minute. But let me melt these, and then you can see the shape I'm talking about. It's almost like a star shape. I began building the petal towards the center of the disc and trailed it out, but they're interwoven. It's sort of like a sun shine shape. All right, go back here. Oh, there we go. Okay. My oxygen pressure had gone very low for some reason. Sometimes when your oxygen regulator has to deal with such tremendous pressures on the high side that they don't always last forever. So I get a few years out of it, and if you're not careful with it and you let that high pressure oxygen get to the low side, it can ruin it very quickly, in my experience. Alright, so that first layer of petals that I showed you, I want to shrink it a little bit. So I'm going to hold this at an angle, and then I'm just going to melt the edge of the disc so it starts to cup shape. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. Generally with a disc this big and not incredibly evenly thick all the way around, is going to want to start cupping unevenly. So I'm trying to vary the heat to get it to cup evenly. And I did finally get it to kind of do that. So now that it's cupped a little bit, I'm going to flatten it. And now what you see is that design has gotten a little bit smaller on the disc because I've taken the glass from the outside and pushed some of it up. So that little decoration on the disc, which was on the surface, is now shoved into the surface a little bit. I'm going to do that one more time and then see if I've got enough room to do another round of petals, those little squiggle marks around the outside edge of the disc, which would be ideal for this experiment. So I'm going to let it cup. I'm going to flatten it. Do that quickly because I want to cup it one more time faster. Flatten it and then see what kind of size I have left to work with. So it shrank. It didn't shrink a lot. But I'm going to go ahead and do that design one more time. I'm going to try to go in between the petals I just did. I can almost touch them. I could probably touch what looks like the actual petals, but they're now inside the surface of the glass. So I can actually go right on top of them almost, and they would still look like a layer that's positioned on the outside of that first layer. Because I've taken the clear glass from the outside and pushed it up. So it's taken that design and recessed the whole thing. So now this is an entirely new surface that I'm decorating. And there it is, the interior group and then the outside decoration. Let's turn up the heat and get those flat. And then I'm going to cup and press several times. And then we add my petioles, which are the green tiny leaves around the flower. It's going a little bit too fast. Slow my torch down. When I'm heating the outside edge to get it to cup, you still have to keep the surface of the disc pretty hot. Because if it gets too cold and the edges are too hot, you're going to develop a crease, and it's not going to gently cup, but it's going to sharply cup. And when that happens, you have the possibility of pushing the flower all the way up so it's floating. It won't be attached to the outside edge. Or you can trap an air bubble. You've sharply formed that cup. And that's good for a different kind of technique, but for this one, we want it to cup gently, and then I press it flat. I'll just keep doing that for another time or two. So much of glass working is you reheat, get 30 seconds, a minute of reheating, and then you have 2 or 3 seconds to act. Whatever you do it perfectly, or you tell yourself it's perfect afterwards. Oh yeah, I feel really good about that one. Then you go and you do your next reheat. Say, oh my gosh, that last one was so good, I hope this one is just as good. Let's find out. Oh yeah, that was great. Alright, so now I shrank down my second design. It's not close, very close to the edge. I'm going to add my petioles, which is going to be that green thread. Turn down my torch because I like it at a pinpoint. Just mount the end of this and put it exactly where I want on the disc. And these I'm going to put little green petals, which are actually going to look like little green worms on here, right between the edge of the disc and the flower that I've drawn on the disc two-dimensionally and now shrunk. Yeah, my torch is all over today. I usually don't have to fiddle with it quite so much. Turn it on, you turn it up, you turn it down. Bam. It's good. This is not. It's very fiddly. Keeps wandering. Which means I probably got some cleaning to do and to reset all of my regulators and start from scratch. Pressure setting wise. Alright, so what I was doing there is heating the disc, heating that green, those green petioles in, and pressing them flat. Now I'm going to start shrinking this, and I want to shrink it all the way, keep turning it around till it comes to shrinks down to a point. And so I'm going to speed the whole thing up because I really want the edges of this to come down and flop and get shoved up into the axis of the rod itself. But I'm still really only dealing with that glass that's on that disc. So I'm going to cup and press it one more time, and I think I'll be able to show you on the side that the flower is really starting to bloom up. On the side, you can see it coming up into the disc. So there you see the design I've been doing. And now if you look on the edge, you see the flower is blooming up into what will become the middle of the marble. You can see the stamen in there and the different layers of petals. I even saw the petioles starting to bloom up. Alright, so now I squished it a little bit uneven, so I need to, a lot of times when things are a little bit uneven, you can heat them and then slow down and stop and then just keep rotating and work with gravity and surface tension and the heat of the torch and get things evened up before you start to do your slumping and changing and manipulating. So you have a good starting point, an even starting point. But you also want to keep the process going. You don't want, if you slow it down too much, it's going to get cold, everything will take forever. So this, a lot of times when I'm doing demonstrations, these are, it's like a hurry up and wait situation. I'm trying to go quickly, but I'm also, there's a lot of parts that I'm slowing down because I need to show you the intermediary steps. And now here I'm waiting. I'm going to do a couple of quick ones in a row. You can see I'm a little bit out of balance on that. That is okay. It's really turning inside out now. And that disc is shrinking down to a point. You can see there's a little cavity in there. You can make sure that stays hot so I don't trap a bubble, because it's kind of doing what I was telling you earlier. Instead of a gentle cup, it's starting to cup more convexly inside. Concavely. Pointily. Valley-like.
Okay.
Concave, thank you. Yes, concave. Alright, now I've shrank it a few more times. It's almost down to a point there. And it's really bloomed out as a flower. Cool. Do it just another couple times. The faster you start going inside out, the more it has a tendency to want to pull into a ball. You don't want to squish it too flat once you're starting to go quicker like this, because then the petals will bend all the way over. It will look more like a fountain than a flower. A little fountaining is good. It's a natural look. I guess when you do the first couple dozen or 100, you're shooting for even and heat control and evenness. And when you're going for a more natural look, it's okay. You know, sometimes things happen, you just work with it. Alright, so now I finished turning that inside out. Flower's looking good. And so I'm going to add some big leaves on the outside. What I want to do first is clean up that end where I said it pulled to a point. It really didn't. It's got like a fuzzy little vague area there where the glass that has color and opaquing agents have mixed with the clear glass, but not in a very undefined way, in an almost vaporous, smoky way. So now I've melted that end and pulled off that unclear area, and I really have it to a cleaner point. Now, so, I described it earlier, but I'm going to describe it again. I'm going to take around where I want the leaves, I'm going to put tiny little green dots, light green dots. This will be the inside of the leaf. Put tiny little green dots on there. They'll resolve in a second. The light green goes almost clear when it's hot. Now I'm going to take a darker green and get a slightly larger melted droplet on the end of the rod. I'm going to go on top of those little green dots, but I want the glass to go and overlap onto the clear so that this light green is completely covered. This doesn't really matter. This is just my own weird thing. You can do this any way you want. Oh wait, you can't do anything. You're not allowed to make marbles, only I am allowed to make marbles. Let's be clear about that. I'm looking at you. Alright. So, I'm melting in the big green dots, covering the little tiny light green dots. Now I'm going to put little light green dots in the middle of those big dark green dots. did it. Now I'm going to melt them in. I'm going to show you first. There we go. Kind of little nubs, different color, so it looks the opposite from underneath. Now melt them till they're flat, and then let them settle down for a second. And then I drag through them. But I don't want to disturb all the surface of the glass, so once I get these melted in and I let them settle down, I'll show you that. I'm also trying to even up the shape of my marble a little bit. So there, those are melted in. Now, I'm going to just really heat one of those dots a lot. And I dragged through it. That's my pick, and now you can see that dot turned into the vein of a leaf. Let's do the next one. Do one more. So I've done 3. This one's dragged through. That one's still a dot. That one's dragged through. Still a dot. Let's get those last 2.
Are they happy little dots, George?
They are happy little dots. You can't drag through them until they're happy. If you try to drag through them and they're not ready, they won't let you. And the key is you want that dot that you put on first inside to be melted as well as the middle dot and the top dot. So when you drag through, you're putting that drag design all the way through. And there's a lot to be said about dragging through different colored dots. I could go on and on. This is the simplest way. I poked into the center of the dot that I had melted and dragged it out to the end. And I dragged it to a point where they all are meeting. If I wanted them to appear closer together, I could pull, heat the end, and pull more glass off, and it'll change the shape of those and pull the end all together. But when I put my pick in the middle of those dots, it made just like a little oval shape. I could drag through the dot. I could drag from one side of the dot to the end and then go drag on the other side. There's all kinds of little designs you could do if you have a steady hand and you've got good heat control of your glass. So now that is, you let that settle down, and now I want to cover those in clear. So I have a medium-sized clear rod. Whoa, it's long. I'm going to flash it, get it up to speed, and I'm keeping the rest of my marble heated up in the back flame because I don't want it to get cold. I want it to stay just under the point where it wants to move. And this medium-sized clear rod, I want to get very hot. Now, since it had a cut or a broken end, it's going to have a lot of oxidation. Oh, you can see it really well. Garbage on the end. So what I'm going to do is heat that rod up, and I'm going to just pull that end off. I got rid of the garbage. I'll show it to you. See? Now it's clean. Now I'm going to cover those petals one at a time. Get a good sized gather from this medium sized rod. It should deposit the exact correct amount of clear glass over top of that leaf. There's one. Cover the leaf. And so let's do that 4 more times. So this is another great way that you can do layers of glass in what would be considered soda lime glass or soft glass. Making all these layers you can't do in some of the harder glasses because there's always a join line. And this would take forever to do this with our get old, turn to dust. Alright, so I've covered each leaf individually here, and now I'm just looking for any part of the green that's exposed. I'm going to go back. If there's any exposed glass that pokes through, it's going to look dumb when the marble's done. That's a technical term. It'll look dumb. Alright, so now I'm starting to melt those in. It's turning marbly. As you've seen on some of my other flower marbles, what I like to do at that point where it's messy, where all the leaves come together. This one's actually really clean and nice. You could leave it and it would look like a floating in the air, an aeroponics flower. But I often like to make a little dot so that I have some place to put a little decoration and sign my name, the titanium pen when it's done. Sign initials and year. So I'm going to just correct the shape of that a little bit by going into a slightly larger size graphite hemisphere. Get that spherical. I'm not trying to get it smooth or anything like that, but I just want to get it spherical. Oh, you can see that little floating point. It's pretty nice. Anyway, I want to make the flat spot. So what I'm going to do is take some green. I'm just going to make a dot there. And then I'll decorate it with some complementary colors of the flower. So I'm going to take a little dot and put it right on that point where all the leaves come together. There it is. Magnifying glass. Now I'll melt it in, and I'll probably press it into a hemisphere so it's a little bit bigger. I want to melt it in and see if I want to make it cover more of the surface area. So here's a good, if I wanted to make it just the amount of surface area that it was now, the best way to do that is heat that green area and then just press it in. If I wanted to make it bigger, I'd heat that green area and then press it into a marble hemisphere, and that would push on the whole surface at once and spread it out. But since I was pushing on the center of that melted dot, it pressed into the surface of the glass, staying smaller. Which is nice. There's a lot of design work you can do almost at any point in the marble. I mean, you can't go into the center and start messing around with this now. It's too late for that. So, whoever suggested that, bad idea. Let's put a couple of just pink dots on there. For fun. Oh, but what if there was a bubble in there that you wanted to get out? Well, there's a special process called the next one. Do it on the next one. This one is fine. It's going to be good. You'll like it. I'll like it. It's a flower. You can't tell it it's wrong. It grew that way. We grew it right now. Alright, so I put some dots on that green. That'll make it more fun to sign. A lot of times I like to take a twisty cane and do the decorating there, because then it really looks, it's like ordered chaos, which I like. Especially for a flower marble where, you know, that's life, ordered chaos. Alright, so now I want to start getting this really spherical. So I'm just gently putting in a little pressure in a hemispherical mold that's larger than the diameter of the marble. So a larger one like that. And then I'm going to go to a smaller one. Oops, burning myself. And then I'm going to just use the rim of the mold I'm going to rotate it while changing the axis of rotation. And that really sphericalizes it a lot. So now this side is spherical. I don't really need to work on the surface a lot here right now because I have some spherical work to do on this other side. There's still this gigantic clear rod attached to my marble, and I can't see the front side of my design. So I'm going to heat this up until it's about almost turning yellow hot. Orange to yellow. I'm going to bore into the surface of the glass at 36 16th of an inch, not even 32nd. Now I'm going to melt the juncture between the glass rod and the marble without letting the rest go cold, especially where the stainless steel rod that I'm holding is attached to the marble. So let's heat that up. Sitting straight now. I'm crooked a lot of times when I'm talking to you guys. It's kind of a fun, new, sideways way of making marble. I kind of like talking about it as I do it now. At first, when I was making marbles, I think the first time I did demonstrations was at Marble Crazy, and I don't think I said much. I said, I'm doing this now. People were asking me questions. I was like, I don't know. I'm just doing it. Stop talking to me. Alright, so I melted off that big clear rod, and I've got this extra blib, that's the technical term, at the end, which is like maybe too much glass. I think I'm going to take some of that off because I want the flower bloom to be pretty close to the top edge of the marble. The idea that I like when I make flowers is that it's filling up almost the whole sphere. But you want it to have a little bit of a magnifying effect as you're looking in the top. So maybe go up, for me, I like to go up 75, 80%, a little bit past 3/4, I'd say. Now, I'm going to heat that. That's going to press in, because I got to correct the sphericalness of that. And I think it's going to be really balanced and nice looking. So I'm going to heat it. I'm going to go into a larger diameter hemisphere than a sphere is. I'm going to use gentle pressure on the side while spinning it, working my way toward the unattached pole. And it only takes a second, almost faster than I can tell you. And I've corrected the sphericalness quite a bit. And now you can see the yellow stamen in the middle, the flower petals, which are B-, and then you see the petioles inside, and those big petals on the outside. And there's the dot in the back with the little pink dots. This could be buds from another flower or something. Anyway, the sphericalness is pretty nice. So it's nice to get that on the first pass, but I'm going to try to perfect my sphere a little bit one more time on this unattached side, going from a larger sphere into a smaller sphere. And now when you hear it spinning fast like that, that means it's very spherical. So that's good. Now I'm just going to let the inside cool a little bit. I'm going to heat the outside surface to let all the ripples from the uneven heat absorption of the graphite. Graphite takes a lot of heat very rapidly out of the glass. That causes ripples in the surface. So I'm heating the glass so the surface tension makes the outside smooth. Then I'm going to let it cool down just enough so that I can use a cherry wood marble mold, essentially a cherry paddle with holes in it. And I'm going to, now that it's cooled down a little bit, I'm going to spin it in there. I'm finalizing and smoothing the surface of that marble. Now it looks very nice and smooth. There's a flower. too cold, I'm always putting it back in. It's like a yo-yo. It's always coming back to the flame. Can't stay out too long. Okay, this is going to be my final attachment point. So I'm using a thin rod. It doesn't have to be thin, but I'm going to roll the end to a pencil point. So I'm only going to have an attachment point that's about 1/8 of an inch across. Then I'm going to heat the stainless steel handle that I have on there, the punty, and it's ready to come off. Boop. Hiss you hear is me putting in water. Putting the water there is handy for chilling any glass that's on the end of the stainless steel punty and turning it to dust, and it comes up. So I'm ready to go. I can evaporate that water quickly and get that thing hot, and it's clean. Doesn't have anything on there that I need to pick out of the marble later when I use it for the next time. So a lot of marbles, I'll be like changing handles fairly rapidly as I'm going from one side to the other, one side to the other, especially when it comes to the finishing process where we're at right now. So now I'm going to perfect the sphericalness of the side that was attached to the steel punty. Same way I did the other one. I went into a larger hemisphere first. A little pressure, a lot of rotation, using gravity, surface tension, heat, pressure from me, all to balance and make that marble very spherical. So it's almost perfectly spherical now. Let's get it. Look at it here. I'm going to flame polish many of the ripples that I can out. Then let it settle down. Then I'm going to run it through my cherry wood molds one more time. I change the axis of rotation, rotating it. I'm hitting each little hole just for a few seconds because I'd rather use the carbon on the wood than burn the wood more. Now I can detach this. I'm going to put it in the fireproof resistant fiberboard that I showed before. I'm going to use this scissors to chill the junction point, and then I'm going to tap it off and then come back to this torch. I tap that off, I'm going to pick up this torch, polish that last attachment point. What I'm going to do is I'm going to heat it. I'm going to take the heat off, see where I am, heat it back up again. If I try to go too fast, I can burn the glass. Sometimes I turn my propane down, so if there are little impurities in there, I have a good chance of oxidizing them off. And I did in this case. There's a little nub there, and I got rid of it. Now I'm taking these little pieces of wire that I bent into special marble pliers, heating them up until they're just orange. Then I'm going to let them cool down to black. Hopefully that's about 950 degrees. I'll pick up my marble. A nice flour. I'm going to put it in the annealing oven to sit for a few hours. Alright, and that is it. That's the marble. So, when I turn off my torch, I always quench everything in water. That's what that hiss is, just so I don't have any hot things on my bench. So, to safely put this torch to bed, what I'm going to do is turn off the oxygen high side first. The oxygen's coming out of the line. I zero out my low side regulator to nothing. Turn off my oxygen. Turn off my propane tank. The propane's going to burn out of the line. Then I'm going to zero out my propane regulator. Ooh, there's a lot of propane in there. It's taking forever. My propane. Let's turn it up. Go. Here we go. Now I turn off this valve, and that torch is done. Now my annealer needs to sit. That's a tiny marble, so in about an hour and a half I'll come and I'll start turning it down, and that's about a 2-hour cool down process for marble that size. So, did I get any other questions, Barb?
No, I did not.
Everyone knows everything about making flowers. You guys are fantastic. So, next week, different camera angles, I hope. And don't forget to shop at Pavliscak Studios, and watch out for upcoming announcements on Facebook with my favorite buddy, Marbles Tuppet. All right, bye-bye. Thanks for coming.